Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's segment, The Modern CMO's Survival Guide. I'm Maura Rivera. I'm the CMO here at Qualified, and I am so excited for our panel discussion that we're going to have today. We have a total all-star lineup. We have Sara Franklin, who's the president and CMO of Salesforce, the cloud computing powerhouse. We have Scott Holden, who's the CMO of Thoughtspot, the modern analytics platform. And we have Sara Varni. She's the CMO of Attentive. They are a leader in mobile marketing, former CMO of Twilio. We have such a rock star lineup, and all of these folks I've had the pleasure of working with throughout my career. Today, we're going to be talking about all things pipeline generation, and we're also just going to pick each other's brains about what's on their minds as CMOs as we wrap up 2022 and we go into 2023. So it's going to be a great session.
Thanks for having us. It's exciting to be here with everyone. Good friends here.
Good friends. Lots of history in this room, which is super, super fun. So I think to start us off, Scott, I want to start with you. Craig kind of referenced in his opening segment something that you said that's really stuck with him, which is as a CMO, if you're not hitting your pipe gen targets, nothing else matters. You can't do any of the fun stuff. All of that is put on hold if you're not hitting your pipeline targets. So I would love to start with you and just hear, where does pipeline generation kind of sit on your priority list right now? And has it changed on your priority list as we wrap up 2022?
Well, thanks for having me, Maura. And it's great that you got this old band back together. Excited to be here with the two Saras. I've said this before, but for me, pipeline is always number one, and nothing ever sort of takes over that number one position. I often tell people that my CEO only calls me for two things. It's pipeline and story, which is more of our brand narrative. But really the only time he ever calls me in a panic state is over pipeline. And, the way I look at it, if he's calling me about like this quarter's pipeline, I'm in trouble. It means that something's already gone wrong. And, because as we all know as marketers, it's not like you can fix your open pipeline problems for this quarter in quarter more often than not. It's something you got to be ahead of. And so that's the thing that always keeps me up at night. And it's a critical thing to think about. And maybe we can get into it here, but I always think of pipeline sort of in two ways. One is the kind of creation engine that you're always feeding and keeping track of. And the second is pipe maturation. So, ideally, if you're always creating at the steady clip, you back into like what your teams need, that once the quarter begins, the open pipeline management, if you will, comes down to sales execution. And so if you have those two things figured out in advance, usually it goes pretty well. But as we all know, it's trying times right now. And so everybody's probably getting a little extra pressure on their pipeline at the moment.
Definitely. And I'm curious this past quarter if there's more of a stress or focus on that pipeline maturation piece. Like for us, we've talked a lot about window shoppers when it comes to pipeline generation, and buyers are still out there. They're still checking out your software, but they might not be as ready to kind of progress through a sales cycle. Have you guys seen any trends in terms of needing to spend more time focusing on pipeline maturation than you have pipeline generation in quarters past?
I'll jump in. I mean, I think in my view, you always have to have a short and a long game when it comes to pipe gen. I think right now in the economic conditions we're living under, there is a desire just to focus on those short-term tactics that are going to show up in your spreadsheet in 2 weeks. There's a real desire to make sure that everything that you're doing from a marketing perspective shows instant ROI. And I think that works to a certain extent. You can go by branded Google keywords all day long and show ROI, but that's not necessarily going to build a healthy long-term funnel. And so I always try to communicate with my stakeholders, if that's my CFO, if that's my head of sales, if it's my CEO, that investing in both, top of funnel as well, investing throughout the entire funnel, honestly, is going to, create a healthier, more efficient funnel long-term and ultimately save your company money. And I think there's no better time than right now to be making sure that argument is clear, and to whatever extent you can back it up with metrics and real data, the better off you're going to be as a marketer.
That's great, Sara Varni. Oh yeah, go ahead, Sara Franklin.
I was just going to chime in and say, I of course agree with everything they both said. And just adding that right now, what we're seeing is that you just need more coverage. And so pipe gen is so critical. Pipe mats, very important. But we're what we're seeing right now is you need to like juice your coverage ratios because you need more pipeline when you're uncertain of budgets with your customers.
Totally. Craig was talking about that in his segment. He was saying that 5x is the new 3x in terms of kind of pipeline coverage that's needed. Sara Franklin, I'm curious for you guys at Salesforce how you're thinking about pipeline generation. And I'm using your last name since we were saying two Sarahs. And Sarah Scott, so we have a lot of S's in the room. But Sara Franklin, would love to hear, you guys are such a mature organization, right? Salesforce is massive, and all of us have worked there. That's where I got the pleasure of working with all three of you guys a long, long time ago. But in terms of being at such a massive company, have you guys pivoted your strategy a lot from a pipeline generation standpoint? Or how are you thinking about pipeline generation for such a big company? At a small company, it's easier to turn off programs, turn on programs, pull levers, shift budget. But what's it like leading marketing at a massive organization that's going through change?
It's a great question. And it's really, when you say the word strategy, it's actually a strategy hasn't changed. The strategy is long term. And as Varni was saying, your strategy is balanced between top of funnel, bottom of funnel, and then your focus on which channels you're going to go through. And what you are looking at right now and what we're seeing is just how we can be more efficient. So we're really doubling down on our analytics right now and seeing what is performing super well. And as we mentioned, increasing the ratios. I love saying that 5x is the new 3x because you really need more coverage. And the strategy remains the same of we're working on building our first party data strategy and zero party data strategy so that we can get our customers and prospects to subscribe to our brand to drive personalized engagement at scale. Nothing about that strategy has changed. Just the tactics may vary, and we are looking more and more into analytics and AI to help us do our best marketing and put the best tactics in market that work right now. And you combine that with relevant messaging. So there's the mechanics of your pipeline, but then just also I'm literally going through all of our content and saying, what do we retire? What do we create? Because we've gone from this rapid change from a pandemic into now a rapid change with economic, downturn. And so that means that you need to not just message growth, but message about efficient growth to your customers and prospects.
Can we double click 100%. On that whole creation versus maturation topic? Because I think it's a fascinating one, and there's certainly a feeling out there that 5x is the new 3x, and in general, if you could snap your fingers and make that happen, why not? It's in this climate, it's definitely the thing that you should do.
Come on, Holden, you got it. Snap right now. It's 5x pipeline.
But it's interesting, right? Because ultimately, like marketing, it contributes to pipeline, and so do your SDR team or your partner team. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's like sellers that create pipeline. And one of the things that like we're wrestling with, I'm sure every company's wrestling with, is that if you're having your sellers have to work harder in this climate to close business, and then you turn around and say, well, I know you're working harder to close it. Why don't you work even harder to create even more? Because it's not going to work. Something has to give. And I think, Sara, we're kind of focused on Sara Franklin, that is. We're focused on the same thing, which is some people, like if you're working some really big deals and like things are going pretty well, distracting you from that to telling you to go create 5x coverage when you're likely to close and hit your target, versus places where there are some folks who maybe don't have later stage pipeline in the works, and they actually would benefit from having more top of funnel. The thing that we're seeing as we dig in is that we've got pockets of strength where we need more, and we've got pockets or we need less, and we have pockets of strength or weakness where we need more. And so the devil's in the details a bit, and I'm spending a lot of my time trying to make those trade-offs right now instead of just the blanket silver bullet. Everybody needs 5x. It's yes, but where are we going to put that cannon?
Yeah, I mean, I think as sharp as you can be with your spend right now, it's every dollar matters. And I also think making sure that you're fine-tuning every break point or every conversion point of your funnel to irk out as much efficiency as possible. Like speed to lead has never been more important. Follow-up has never been important. You don't want to leave a pipeline dollar, on the table these days. And I think even though that might seem small on the margins, my dog's excited about this too. If you can hear it in the background, even though it might seem small in the margins, that can add up to get you closer to what you need by the end of the quarter.
Yeah, it's not like we're all getting bigger budgets in this climate to go get that 5x. It's like, what can we do right now to bend the curve with no new dollars? And that's a tall ask. I mean, it's the one that's been put on us. I'm sure we're all getting that, but you got to be smart about where you place those bets.
Yeah, 100%.
And I was going to ask the question, I think now's the time where we're all probably getting a lot of scrutiny from other stakeholders in the business. Scott, you talked about those calls from your CEO. I think right now we have CFOs, CEOs, people who used to kind of maybe, not saying CEOs would, but maybe CFOs paid less attention to marketing. Now they're our new best friend, whether we like it or not. I know I've been in a lot of meetings with our great finance team, looking at the data, giving them justification, talking about ROI. How do you guys think about creating trust with those counterparts and kind of helping educate and get buy-in from teams who might not be as familiar with marketing? Sarah Franklin, you had talked about analytics being really important right now and having single source of truth to kind of justify your investments. But how do you create trust with those partners, especially for things that might not have that short-term return, Sara Varni, that you talked about, but it's a longer investment in the kind of the company and the brand? How do you guys think about those relationships and building trust there?
I can start and just say something which is very Salesforce, and this crew will know, which is transparency builds trust. And we've created our heart of marketing, which is our deep analytics, which I have shared with the entire team and leadership team and distribution, marketing, et cetera. Anybody that wants to know how we're spending our money, where it's going, our budget is completely transparent, and I'm completely accountable to the return on those investments. And I think you build the trust through that transparency. Two, you just show up with common sense. If something doesn't work, you admit it and you say, yeah, I did this and it didn't work. Or, yeah, I ran this event. Maybe it could be a little bit more cost efficient and we don't need, the live trees and the waterfall as much as we love the live trees and the waterfall.
Like Disneyland at those Salesforce events.
Yeah. Right? No, but then when you say that, you say, hey, we could take away the waterfall, then Holden, exactly that emotion comes out. People say, no, I don't want to lose the waterfall, or I don't want to lose the stuffies. But you can really just show up yourself as a real person and don't get defensive. It's a fair question to ask when somebody says, is this effective to spend? It's your money just as much as it is their money, and it's fair. So when you lean into the logic of it and out of the emotion, you let the analytics guide you, and then you bring them in the fold a little bit and you get them close to it. They get attached. The other thing is, and I've just been through this, where candidly, we cut some stuff and now it's, 2 quarters later and they're like, hey, where's that pipeline? You're like, well, see this negative sign? That's what you see. When you cut that money, that pipeline goes down. Then they're like, oh, we don't want to do that. And so sometimes you have to roll with it, and just that would be my advice.
I was going to say, like, very similar things. I think it's easy to take things personally in this environment. I think you have to quickly put your shareholder hat on and say, what is the best thing for the company? We all have efficiency that we can gain in our business. And I think that this, even though it's trying times, we're going to come out of it stronger and better marketers. But I also think it's like really being clear on what's above the line and what's below the line. What are the trade-offs if we don't fund X, Y, and Z? Unfortunately, palm trees and stuffies aren't the below the lines for me right now. But like, I think just being hyper clear, like, hey, if we cut that budget, we might not be able to deliver the number of leads that we were thinking in for our lower segments. And if we don't do that, sales is going to have to make up that gap. And just, I think, being really clear on what those trade-offs are and saying, like, be very kind of neutral about it. Like, as a shareholder, like, I am, concerned that we're not going to hit our target in X. I think you're going to get a way better response than being like, why does marketing always get the short end of the stick? And why are we just, constantly like moving stuff to sales, and why are we just, constantly constantly like moving stuff to sales, or whatever the dynamic is at your company. I think if you can be calm and measured about it and very practical with numbers and say, hey, this is what we'll get for this spend and this is what we won't, you're going to have, to Sarah's point, you're going to build more trust with those stakeholders over time.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of simple, right? It goes back to communication, it goes back to being data driven. Sara Varni, I was curious about you guys because Attentive, you guys are blowing up right now. I've seen you guys make all these big brand plays, big billboards on the 101. You just had a huge conference. Was it your Thread conference?
Yes.
How are you thinking about those big investments? Because you guys have burst onto the scene, and it isn't a natural time to want to pull back once you have this momentum. So how are you guys thinking about it at Attentive?
Well, I think it goes
and kind
back
of these
to
big
like
bets.
being really mindful about where you're placing those bets. When we went and went through the process of buying our out of home placements, we went like super like pop culture, like touristy center of the world type stuff, like right in the middle of Times Square. And we had a bunch of salespeople take pictures with it and share it all on their social networks. Like we didn't go and like spray and pray a bunch of different places. Or we went close to events where we knew a lot of our audience was already going to be, and they were likely to go and share the content. So I think it's, I still believe you definitely will always want to have that short and long game, and you just have to figure out how can those ratios might change a little bit right now in this environment when you really have to put your dollars to work. But I think with the remaining budget that you have to still think about how to invest in brand and think about how to invest in those long-term tactics. You just want to be really smart with how you can make those dollars go as far as possible.
I mean, I always think that there's people think that there's like pipeline generating activities and then non-pipeline or brand. I think of it as all connected. I mean, everything we do, especially in B2B marketing, is in the service of pipeline. Even the brand things that we do, even the palm trees and the music and Dreamforce. I mean, it all matters, and people we all buy with emotion. Right.
Stuffies matter.
Actually, ultimately do feed pipeline at the end of the day. The challenge, I think, for us as marketers is that, we're in this world of art and science, and the science part of marketing is really complicated. I mean, it's hard to explain like all the nuance of what we do to people that aren't in the trenches with us every day. And I think one of the things marketers claim to be great storytellers, we have to be great storytellers and educators inside the company about how marketing works. And so, I invest a lot of time to try and explain whatever programs and new thing we're doing. Varni, you mentioned segments, like understanding the different segments behave in different ways, different marketing channels behave in different ways. All of that stuff matters when you're showing up to your CFO hat in hand. If they understand the mechanics of what we do, they're much more likely to greenlight that initiative or that, that budget for that new program.
That's great. I think you guys all have the shared sentiment of like, bring them along for the ride, bring them into the journey, create a partnership so that it feels like they're kind of bought into what you're doing. Scott, I'd love to ask you the same question. Thoughtspot, you guys are one of the most modern brands. You're a brand I look to all the time for your website, for your videos, for your conferences, your Beyond conferences in the spring. How are you kind of looking at priorities for 2023? Are you toning down everything from a brand perspective, or are you keeping it full throttle, knowing that it creates this halo for pipeline generation?
Well, even if I tried to turn it down, I think our creative team and our brand team would always be trying to dial it up. It's funny when folks have passion around something, you can't hold them back to some degree. But, I'm in Thoughtspot is an analytics platform. We're in a hyper competitive space. Actually, Sarah Franklin and I compete with one of her many products on this dimension.
Friendly competition. It's good.
But it's, it couldn't be a more important time for analytics. And so even though the macro climate is not great right now, analytics, people need it even when, they're going down. They need to study those numbers just as much as when they're going up. And so we haven't really seen any like major impact there. I think people are, making you work a little harder to justify spend. But that's, generally good practice anyway. So in terms of like where we're focused, I think they're like, for us, it's less about the macro conditions and more about, we've historically, and you know this more, you've been following us for a while, like we sold to generally the Fortune 500, the Global 2000, like really big companies. And recently we just started selling to basically everybody. We've launched, a $99 a month product. And so I'm really focused on that whole segment worldview and what worked in terms of big ABM tactics for the Coca-Colas and the Apples of the world are not necessarily going to work for the 10-person startup down the street. And those tactics and how we allocate dollars to them, like that's actually the conversation I'm having with our CFO right now, because as you ramp new businesses, new segments, the mechanics are different and everybody needs to understand how those mechanics vary. So that's where I'm spending a lot of my time deep in data, justifying those investments by segment.
But
I
it
would
is
just
true.
add on to
Oh
that
yeah, go ahead,
real
Sarah.
quickly on analytics, where we tend to focus on the marketing tactic analytics. There's a lot more analytics as well, or just around your organization, which are so important to pay attention to in terms of what people are doing, where they're investing their time. And there's a lot better ways now to look at that. And the percentage of your budget between, program headcount, what you're spending on, what you've augmented headcount with contractors and things like that. And that's another thing which, as a CMO, you have to have a really strong understanding of the business that you're running in your team, so that you can have that strategic conversation of where you need to be growing and investing and what asks you're asking for, if you really need headcount or if you really need program, and how to balance that through the year so that you can also work with your finance business partner to not just be given a bunch of money at one point in time and then have to, just go big on some paid media or something at the end of a quarter, but really so you can balance those things out. So there's a lot of strategy in your budget planning and your workforce analytics. So you need to not just look at like how well your marketing is doing. You really need to look at how well you're performing as a marketing organization.
I think that's a great segue to my next question, which is thinking about your marketing organizations and your teams. You guys all have big teams, and this has been, a trying year to lead teams. How have you guys kind of taken your teams through these shaky times, your internal marketing teams? And how do you think about leading with optimism and getting them excited for next year? We talk about the fact that for a lot of people in the workforce, this is their first downturn they've experienced. So how do you guys think about leading as a CMO and keeping your team motivated as the world around us has changed a lot this year?
I'll take it.
Okay, you go, Scott.
Well, I mean, we're in this climate of doing more with less, and that's a tough time to be a leader. And we all find ourselves going from pandemic leadership, which for me personally was the hardest thing I've ever done, trying to lead teams remotely. We changed a bunch of things in our go-to-market during that time, and that was trying. And now we're entering this new era of, a down economy, and it's hard also. And so I think the number one message that I've been giving my team is about focus. And, it's easy to say, we need this, we need this, we need this. And I keep telling them, push back on me. These are the priorities. We've just gone through our whole, V2 mom process, which we all learned and loved from Salesforce days. And I've spent a lot of time on that. And I'm asking my team to, push back on me and say, these are the things that matter. Let's debate what the priorities are. And then, if you find yourself working on something that isn't on the priority list as we've outlined it, challenge me, push back. And it's a forever battle. Like it's one of those things. I think when times are tough as leaders, we have to over communicate and communicate and communicate and communicate. But that's the number one thing for me is focus, because I feel the tension in the team. And the only thing we can say is like, okay, it's not like we're never going to do that, but maybe we can push that out a little bit. And you kind of got to fall back on that is the play, as opposed to like, okay, let's give up. You got to move forward.
No giving up ever.
Yeah, well, yeah, not now. It's when.
I completely agree. Like V2 moms, so important. Having clear prioritization, focus, all of that's so important. What I would say in addition is, and this group is one that leads from the front. You're there with your team. You do all those things. A shift, I will say, is that I'm a huge believer in person right now. We are coming off of 2 years of people being away from each other, away from your culture. The serendipitous conversations that you would have just 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, you don't get that in the in the digital world. And it's very interesting because people very much like think they want something, but it's different than what they need. And a lot of people want to be at home, to have the flexibility to, um, you know, not have the commute, to do the lot. Like it's all great, but you don't understand, or I didn't understand until really recently, how much we need to be together, to learn from each other, to connect with each other. It doesn't mean that you have to be in the office every day, 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 or whatever. But that has been a shift that we've been really purposely working on, which is getting people back into the office and getting people and get back with our customers in person. And I think that that is the next step level change for us coming out of the pandemic.
What are you doing
People
there in
want to be
terms
at
of like
home.
what's
What?
typical? Like are you back 2 days a week, 3 days a week, 5 days a week?
It's interesting if I'm home, like meaning in my home area, I'm in the office unless it's maybe a Friday or something. But I've balanced that with being out with customers and traveling. So have done a fair amount of traveling. I know Varney, you've done some traveling. You go to New York a fair bit.
Just getting together for the
So,
moments
but
that matter too. I think there are certain things in marketing that are like they're possible to do on Zoom. It's just a terrible experience. Like I don't know if you guys have written a keynote on Zoom. It's awful. And so, like, I think, of course, we just don't. There's not money raining out of the sky to do offsites everywhere. We're primarily a remote organization at Attentive, but if we have something coming up that needs a level of collaboration and getting in front of a whiteboard and thinking through some creative challenges, I really try to figure out how we can get in person and tackle some of that live. Because even if you're gonna spend those dollars to get everyone in the same place, it's going to be much more efficient than having 15 people on 20 Zoom meetings to achieve the same thing you could do in 2 hours live.
I think you guys are right. That's what's motivating right now, is remembering it's about like the relationships and the people and working on projects and getting your hands dirty. That's what will kind of carry people through. Sara Varni, for you, how are you thinking about leading your teams through these
Yeah,
times?
I mean, I definitely agree with everything that Sara and Scott said. I think getting people to think about new ways to engage. I think about prioritization, how important that is right now. I think the one thing I'd add is just I'm trying to reward creativity wherever I can. And I try to remind people some of the best software companies in the world were born in these crazy times of uncertainty. Salesforce being one of them. Salesforce started in 1999, right before the dot-com bust. I think that I'm trying to encourage people to think outside of the box, think about how we can be investing in things that are pretty much free, except for the people resource. Like, how do you think about this is a great time to clean up your SEO strategy and to start really investing in content. This is a great time to really think about how you can engage your super users to go do your bidding for you and get more reach. And so wherever I can, I'm really trying to encourage my employees to think about how we can do more with less. Really,
That's awesome.
What I like about what Varney just said is that it's something I love about her is that she's super fun. And so when you're embracing creativity, it's like we need to have fun, do more with less, but still have fun doing it, right? And we work hard, but we can have fun at the same time. And that's what will engage your employees too. And so, this is one of the funnest bunches here. It's we used to have a lot of fun in the office, with silly things, even with just having little headbands at your desk or, whatever you do, like that type of fun. And I love, Varney, how you said rewarding the creativity, because there's a lot of fun, creative ideas that people can bring.
That's great. I know we're almost at time, but in terms
Dan, what did Dan just do recently, Maura? He did some Halloween thing.
Hollywood Studios, Dan Darcy is our he's our talent to start. He might leave us for Hollywood soon. But we have just a few minutes left, but I'd love to wrap. You guys are talking about motivation and motivating your employees. we have an audience here full of CMOs and revenue leaders, and they're looking for motivation for 2023 as we kind of tackle a new year. Any sage advice, it can kind of be lightning round as to how you think CMOs should be thinking about pipe gen going into 2023, or kind of where their head should be at as we go into a new year. Scott, I'll start with you.
Let's see. So, I mean, there are two interesting trends on my mind right now, and they're kind of juxtaposed, sort of competing for brain space. And one is that, it's been said that every company is becoming a media company. And if you look at, what Salesforce has done, Sarah, with Salesforce Plus, like we're all trying to put out this amazing high-end content to inspire our buyers, and you're kind of like really trying to punch up. And then you've got this other thing on the horizon, which is AI generated content, which is done by a machine and lacks, I think by most people's estimation, it lacks some of the finesse and some of that, connective tissue to get people excited and emotional. And so I'm trying to get my head around these two things and be like, when do I, how do I think about them at the same time? And I think both are massive trends that we need to be taking advantage of, but how you do that and how you place your bets needs to be thought out carefully.
And how about you, Varni? I'm going by last names now because it's just easier. Any advice for kind of the crowd of what you think CMOs should be focused on as we wrap up the year and go into 2023?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, expect the unexpected. This market is moving fast. And, just from a general management perspective, I would think about how you can leave like 10 to 20% of slack in your roadmap for next year. Like if you think about, if we go back a year in time, it was like Omnicron Central. We were all still doing like virtual wine tastings, and just think like how different the environment is we're living in today. So, I think to the extent that you can save a little slack for your team in the case that who knows what's coming. I'm not saying a global pandemic, but we just don't know like what's going to happen from an inflation standpoint, from a market standpoint. And I think to the extent that you can be agile and flexible and move to that and move to where your customers are, the better off you're going to be as a team.
100%. And Sarah Franklin, over to you.
Everything they've said, I would say to add on, just be steady in your strategy. Whether, like as Scott said, you're, want to be a media company, have, really highly produced content or, community created content. That content has a purpose. It's to create people subscribing to your brand and building your first party data strategy and building that out. So whatever the tactics are, don't lose sight of your strategy. And as Varni said, be flexible, be sane, know that, tough times don't last, tough people do, and we'll all get through it. And so there's more to life than, only pipeline, although that we do live and breathe by the pipeline. But that's where, but that's where having friends that, you can tap to and building a CMO network and community is so important. Whether you're CMO, whether you're head of marketing, whether you do demand gen, whether you do creative, tap your brother, sister, friend in the industry is ever more important, and keep yourself steady because it's going to be tough times, but we'll get through it.
That's great. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. And I think it's important that everybody connects with each other, looks to each other, learns from each other, because it's easy to get heads down in your own world, in your own business, and to learn from each other. So we feel so grateful that you guys are able to join us for Pipeline Summit. Scott, Sarah, what an all-star lineup. It was so fun to reconnect and just hear kind of where your heads are at from a CMO standpoint, especially as we wrap up the year and go into 2023. So a ton of valuable nuggets in this session. And we will see you guys soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us, Maura.
Great to see you.
Thank you.